So it's great to see so many of you here this evening. Thank you so much for joining, and in a good time too, because we are, I think, oversubscribed for this webinar. I think we've had more people who have registered than we had places. We had about 100 spaces, and I think they have all been taken, which is great. So it's obviously a topic which is, affecting a lot of people, is the whole COVID-19 aspect of investing in HMOs. How do we do it? How do we make it work? And what's happening in the wider economy that we should know about that's going to influence our next steps. However, before we get on to that, I would like to just do a little bit of introductions and just check that you can all see me and hear me. So if you could put your name and a yes or a no in the chat panel. Obviously, if you can't hear me and see me, you won't know what I'm talking about. But if you could message into the chat panel, that would be fantastic, just that I know you can all hear me and see me. Great, lovely to welcome you, Hugh. You're the first one up this evening. Ben, Claire, Kaylee, Charmaine, Nigel, Partha, hello there. Rob, another Rob, great. Sue, Dominic, Graham, Mark, Sarah. I think we're going to have some more people as the evening goes on. So please feel free just to, if you can send me your name and to say hi so that I know you can hear me, that's great. Because that's the one fear I think you have when you're doing Zoom webinars, is that actually you're talking and nobody can hear you. So if there is a problem with the sound, please do let me know. Message me on the chat panel, just so that I can be aware of that. Because lots of people are using their internet even more than ever these days, aren't they? Now, the format for this evening, I will be sharing with you for about an hour what I've been doing some research on and looking at the wider aspects of the economy. And I think my view is that, this is a really good time for us to educate ourselves about economics. I'm not an economist. I don't have a background in economics, but I find it a very interesting subject. I think being a property investor is linked with knowing something about the economy. And when things are going well and we've got lots of tenants and our rents are rolling in and we're buying property and refurbing it, refinancing it and doing the whole cycle, it's very easy to feel a little bit blasé about that and to feel like, it doesn't really matter. And then suddenly we have an incident, a difficulty, and of course what we've got at the moment with COVID-19, and it suddenly makes us sit up and think and take notice. So I think a lot of people have started to wonder, what does this mean for them in terms of their potential future as an investor? So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, is how does the current situation affect you, and particularly with regard to HMOs. Now, after that hour is up, and I will try not to take any longer than an hour, then I propose that we have a Q&A session for about half an hour, and then we're due to finish the webinar at 9 p.m. tonight. So that's so you get a bit of structure. So you might want to just stay for the first hour, and that's fine, or you might want to stay on for the Q&A afterwards. I'm hoping that some of the things I talk about tonight will stimulate you so much that you'll think I've got lots of questions and you'll want to stay on. So that would be great if you do decide to do that. Hello, Gavin. Hi, Parvinder. Great to have you with us this evening too. So we'll also just stop for 2 minutes at 8 o'clock, because I know many of you have asked me, could we please stop and clap the NHS, which is becoming a regular routine now, isn't it? So let's just offer a bit of gratitude to those people who are working very hard on the front line of services. So we'll pause the webinar for just about 2 minutes, so about 1 minute to 8 and then 1 minute after 8, and then we'll come back. And of course, if you're quick, you could grab yourself a cup of tea during that time as well. Okay, so thank you all very much indeed for being here. It's lovely to have you here. Do feel free to message me in the chat panel as well if you have anything that crops up that you want to talk about. Otherwise, hopefully you have found the Q&A panel. At the bottom of your screen, you should see the Q&A, and you'll be able to put your questions in there. If you would like me to see those before we open up at 8:30 for questions and answers. So I'll just open up my PowerPoint. So what is the outlook for HMOs post-COVID-19? Now, some of you might have been on my first webinar that I ran a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to give you the link and the share to that. This webinar will also be uploaded to my YouTube channel. So if you miss anything or you forget something or you want to revisit part of it, you'll be able to go back and have a look at that. Tonight is very much a webinar which is going to share with you some of the research I've been doing in sort of behind the scenes about what's happening. Some of it you may already know. And what I should point out is I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not, you know, I'm not an economist. So some of what I share will be my own views. Now, I've been investing in property for over 21 years now. So I've been through 2 or 3 of these kind of cycles before. I have to say nothing quite as severe as this one, nothing quite so acute as this one. However, I think that gives me a little bit of credibility in terms of being able to draw on some experience about what is the important priority for you as an investor when you are facing some of these very big unknowns. So we're going to go through some of these tonight. So this is the second webinar in the series. The third one that I'm going to be doing in a couple of weeks' time will be on the money markets, and we're going to look at banking and the money markets and HMOs. I have another webinar I'm running next week as well, which is particularly if you are fairly new to investing in HMOs and you're wondering how you can get into this very lucrative section of the market and how you can still make it work for you even in these times of coronavirus. So next week is more for somebody who's maybe got 1 or 2 HMOs, they're fairly new to HMOs, maybe you haven't done much training or education, you've dabbled your toes in the water, and you're perhaps looking now to expand your portfolio and to get some really solid learning under your belt. So that is next Wednesday, and I'll give you the link at the end of the webinar to register for that one next week. And then the following week will be the third one in this series, which is going to be about the banks and the money markets and how they affect what we do as investors. So tonight, I particularly want to focus on aspects of the economy, some of which we covered in the first webinar. So I'm not going to go over some of those lessons that we looked at in the first webinar. So please, as I say, do go back and have a look at those. But we're tonight looking a bit more at the human impact of some of those pillars of economic cycles. So just to give you a little bit of background about me, if we haven't met in person or you haven't heard me speak before. So I have 3 companies that I run. Best Nest is the initial company that I used to set up my portfolio of HMOs. Best Nest Lets is my letting agency, which now runs all those HMOs, and we also rent out rooms for other landlords. We've got about 155 rooms that we're renting out. And Best Nest Egg is the sourcing and project management company that we use to work with investors. So if we are working with investors, we will go through Best Nest Egg. These are my 4 lovely sons. Now, actually, my youngest boy there, Tom, he was probably only 7 or 8 when that photo was taken, and he's significantly taller now. In fact, it's quite depressing because he's actually taller than me. I couldn't believe that. We have our birthdays about 2 days apart, and it was months before my birthday that he'd already overtaken me, and he's only 12 years old. I don't know what I'm feeding him, but it's obviously causing him to grow up like a beanpole. And then those are my 3 other older boys from my first marriage. And I share this slide really because, you know, I think for many of us, we go back to that reason why, don't we? When we're facing these difficult times, it's a good time to think, why am I doing this? Why am I suffering? Why am I working so hard? Why am I dealing with all the problems of my tenants? And it could be because actually you've got a deeper, bigger reason. And for me, it's for my boys, to help them to create cash flow and income for their future and financial freedom for them too. So that's kind of my why. And I've got a particularly special reason because my 2 eldest boys, the one on the left in the chef's uniform and the one on the right in the light blue shirt, they both got cystic fibrosis, and they are obviously quite badly at risk of COVID-19. And so therefore both of them are taking very, very good care of their health and in lockdown, and making sure that they are, you know, removing any risk of catching the disease because it could be fatal for them. So it has a particular, you could say, flavour for me, that is so important that we look after our health. And I'm very keen on making sure that I keep as healthy and fit as I can, because they might need me at some point. Now, you've probably seen some of my writing. I've done writing for various different magazines. I've been writing a few pieces recently for other property magazines, and my book as well. If you haven't already seen it, I'll just actually, all you can see on that, because of the green screen, is it's not very clear, is it? Anyway, there, that might be a better view. So my latest book, Extraordinary Profits from Ordinary Property, that was published last year. It's a bit more of a weighty tome than my original book, but I was doing a special offer this week on my Facebook group because it was my birthday on Monday. So if you haven't grabbed yourself a copy of that book, please go onto the Facebook group and get yourself a copy. It's absolutely free. I just would like you please to pay for postage and packing, because it just helps us cover the cost of sending those books out. So it's just £3.80 for postage and packing, but you get the book absolutely free. And in that, you learn a bit more about my story, how I started investing in HMOs, and the system that I created to make that happen. So I'm not going to sell it tonight. It's absolutely, it's a freebie. How about that? Don't we all like freebies? So, coronavirus, big issue. I'm not going to talk too much tonight about some of the health statistics, because I think we're probably a little bit more bombarded and overwhelmed with some of those. But what does it actually mean for us in terms of investing? And, you know, ultimately, my question I ask myself with everything that I learn is, so what? So what? So all this stuff might be very interesting, but so what? What does it actually mean for me as an investor? And tonight I'm going to try and, if you like, space out those dots, or should I say, line up those dots, so that you can see why this matters today. Now, as we know, only a couple of days ago, Chris Whitty said that he thinks that lockdown is probably going to be much longer than we had originally thought. If it's not lockdown, it will be social distancing that will be part of our behaviour, part of our way of life for at least the next year. We know that this disease affects the older population much more hard. It affects older people much worse than it does younger people. So that obviously it's a consideration. You know, we've got to just recognise that that is the situation. So younger people are effectively favoured by the disease. Again, these are just from statistics. I'm not making any conclusion about it. I'm just telling you the statistics. We see that unemployment is going to be rising. We've seen that happen already. I think there's an extra 2 million people already registered as unemployed. So these are people who are not furloughed, so they're not getting any assistance from the government, but they have been made redundant, or they have found that their contract has come to an end and it hasn't been renewed. I believe this is going to completely change the world economy, and there's going to be some very, very big decisions that governments are going to have to make over the next year or so. And I think we're going to see some fundamental changes to the way that the world economy operates. And it's worth us all keeping our eye on that. So I think it means we have to rethink our business. And I'm going to share with you how you can do that and how you can do this. Okay, this is not a challenge that is too big for any of us to overcome. None of what I'm going to share with you tonight should make you feel scared. It should give you the feeling of excitement that there is an opportunity around the corner, that there is a possibility of something greater happening as a result of coronavirus, not something terrible and destructive. And I think it does offer great opportunity to people who are prepared to stick with it and evolve and maybe change their business model slightly. So in the first webinar, we had a look at how the government creates money, how it spends money, what GDP is, and how the bank borrows money in order to fund its spending. And we looked at some of the figures around that, and some of them were a little bit eye-watering, because there's been a lot of creation of money over the last few weeks, because the government have wanted to support businesses and support individuals who are suffering from not just COVID-19, but from suffering from the economic effects of COVID-19. So it's had to create lots of money to be able to put into the pockets of people to help them to survive at least the next few months. But I talk all about that on a previous webinar, so I'm not going to tell you about that now. Here's my YouTube channel though, which I did promise to share with you, and this one circled in red is Coronis and your HMO and the economic outlook. So it may sound similar to tonight. I probably need to change the title, but tonight we're going to be focusing a bit more on human behavior. But if you want to go back and have a look at that one, that's up on my YouTube channel. So the first area that I wanted us to address or to look at is personal debt and borrowing. So rather than looking at government debt and borrowing, which we looked at before, let's think about personal debt and borrowing. Gavin, don't worry, it's all being recorded. So if you can't catch what I'm saying, you can go back and have a look at it in the recording. So I hope that helps you. It is a pain if you haven't got a very good recording and a very good connection though. So what we knew before COVID-19 came along, so this is prior to COVID-19, is that, and you can see the date of this article, Wednesday the 15th of January 2020, low-income households have piled up expensive debt and are vulnerable to shocks, report finds. So a report came out, I think it might have been the Office for Budget Responsibility, that said that low-income households have got an awful lot of debt. So this is consumer debt on the whole, rather than mortgage debt. So this was way back in January, okay? Now, this comes from the Office for National Statistics, which this is not updated to current date. This is obviously just goes to 2018, but I thought this is a really useful chart. I'm going to show you a couple of charts of these actually tonight, because you can see here how debt has changed. So between April 2014 to March 2016, and then from 2016 to March 2018. Now, obviously, in 2014, we were still somewhat coming out of the crash of 2008, 2009. Things had settled down. People were back in jobs. The economy was performing. It was a bit meager. It was a bit pathetic, but it was, you know, we had some GDP growth. So everything was reasonably stable. But you can see how two particular areas have grown from April 2016 to March 2018. Hire purchase, so that includes things like car loans, PCP, and student loans. So student loans massively grew during that time. And we know that in times of recession or slow economic growth, one of the things that 18 and 19-year-olds do is go to university. If particularly people, and of course they do it anyway, but particularly people who might have gone to get an apprenticeship or a job, they decide, actually, I'm going to try and get into uni because it defers my activity in the wider economic sector. Now, they might not be conscious of that, but trends show that this is exactly what happens, is that when there is a paucity of jobs and a paucity of you know, sort of potential careers, a lot of young people think, right, I think I'll go to uni because that will help me to get a degree, it will help me to be qualified, all of which is a great thing. But of course, what it's also done is increase student debt. And of course, the government also raised the limits of student loans and the cost of going to university. So that had a, you know, you can see a huge effect. There was another, I think, £9 billion that was borrowed because of student debt in that period. And as we know, student debt will be particularly affecting people now between the ages of 20 and 35. It's that sort of millennial generation who will be most affected by this level of debt. Now, this chart, also from the OBR, shows the total debt per household linked to how wealthy these individual people are. So let's start at the bottom, what's called the first decile, the lowest wealth decile. So these are the people, you know, at the lowest section of our economy. Now, it doesn't say exactly what that band is, but it would probably be people who are maybe on some form of benefit. They may be economically active, but on the minimum wage. They may have tax credits. And what we see here is that the light teal coloured chart, the teal coloured bar, shows that they don't really have much property debt. It's very rare for people at that level on the kind of spectrum to have property debt. But other debt, financial debt, which is the credit card debt, consumer debt, they have a lot of it. And as we go down that chart and we move maybe to the, let's look at the fifth wealth decile. So this is what you might call the squeezed middle. So these are people who are maybe in fairly good jobs. They might be earning, I don't know, maybe £30,000 to £40,000, something like that. So higher than the national average, but they have mortgages. They've jumped on the property ladder, and we can see that from the third wealth decile upwards, most people there have some property debt. So their total debt includes their property debt, their mortgage debt, as well as their financial debt. But even though they are not the highest wealth decile, they have overall the highest debt. So they carry the most burden for debt. So this is why we call them the squeezed middle, because they have, relative to their debt levels, they have the lowest income. They've got the highest debt, but relative to that, they've got the lowest income. Now, can you just put a Y in the chat panel if you're following me so far, so that I know you're with me? Great. That's great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I don't want you to be lost. And in fact, when I did a webinar the other week, somebody said, is this about HMOs? And I had to say, it is about HMOs. He'd actually arrived a little bit late. So I said, look, this is about HMOs, but it's about the bigger picture. So we're going to get onto the HMO bit, I promise, but I want to share with you some of the other statistics you need to know so you can make a decision about your investing moving forward. So he was like, oh, okay, fine, fair enough. Okay. So yeah, so that was, there we go. I've highlighted it in a different slide. Now, this is another interesting chart. This is from some European think tank. Is it the OECD? I think it is the OECD. And this is a percentage of net disposable income. So this shows the whole of the OECD area. Actually, there's a few other countries in there as benchmarks, like Canada, New Zealand, United States, and we can see that as a percentage of net disposable income, the household debt in the UK is 141%. So the picture we have here, and this is pre-COVID-19, okay, so this is recent. Yes, there we go, the sources at the top of the screen, OECD. So of net disposable income, the United Kingdom has 141% of net disposable income. Okay, so that shows you how much debt we're carrying as a country, how much debt we're carrying as individuals. Now, the key thing, of course, about debt, you know about debt, I know about debt, because we're property investors, and we understand that you need to use debt to grow your portfolio. Not that everybody does it like that. Some people decide to buy it for cash and they don't leverage, and that's their choice. That's fine. But most of us use debt to leverage our property portfolio, particularly when interest rates are low, which is what they have been. And that's because it's easy to service the debt, isn't it? If your debt is at 1% to service, it's cheap to service the debt, particularly if you rent out that property and maybe you've got a 5-bed HMO. So once you've paid all the bills, you might be making £1,000 a month easily. Because your interest rate on your mortgage is low, so your mortgage might only be £300 or £400 a month. Happy days. Everyone's happy. They've got accommodation that's good quality. You look after your tenants well. They pay their rent, and you make some money. So and the banks are happy because they've lent you the money and they can make money from you. So everybody's happy. So that's great when everything is going well. So just hang on to that thought for a moment. Now, here are some other statistics about position of individuals within the economy who are at that level where debt is, you could say, starting to be a problem for them. So we have 12.8 million people with no or less than £1,500 in savings. Now, at a time like this, let's say some of those people have lost their jobs, maybe they're on furlough, maybe they are only receiving 80% of their previous income. That is quite shocking as a statistic, I think. That is basically 1 in 5 people does not have they just probably live paycheck to paycheck. There's a lot of unsecured debt per adult and credit card debt. And some of the debt figures you'll see relate to mortgages. So the £60,000 average total debt per UK household, it also includes mortgages. So that's something just to bear in mind. But given that we know about 20 to 25% of properties are unencumbered, that is, they don't have any mortgages on them, that means that the 75% of people who have got mortgages have got quite high levels of borrowing. And this is taken from a charity website, I think MoneyWise, who, funnily enough, I was on there today, and there's a big notice on the front saying, we've all been furloughed. I'm afraid we're a money charity. We're here to help people who are in debt, but unfortunately, we've all been furloughed and the office is closed down, which I thought was slightly ironic. Anyway, these are some of their statistics. And this is the one that I just wanted to pick out because there's lots of numbers here. They had predicted before COVID-19 that the average household debt would rise in 2023 to 2024 to £86,000. So the point is, the trend is not getting any less. The trend is that we, as a nation, are becoming more and more and more and more indebted. Not only is our government carrying more debt, but we as individuals are carrying more debt as well. And this has an impact. And we're going to examine what that impact is. Now, one of the things, of course, that often governments will look at is house purchases and house buying as a measure to see, is the debt, particularly mortgage debt, sustainable? Because if we're all earning good salaries and we're getting good rents from our tenants, then even at 4 or 5%, it's serviceable. The debt is serviceable. It's not too big a deal. And I have to say, all the time that I've been investing in property, my debt has always been serviced by my tenants. I've never, apart from, you know, the odd bad tenant who hasn't paid their rent, which, you know, you do get, I would say 98% of my debt has always been covered by my tenants. So I've never really worried about that. And that's, of course, because there is still such a lot of demand for rental property in the UK. But we'll come on to that in a moment. So this chart shows you the relationship between earnings and house prices and how much first-time buyers are having to pay to buy a new property. Now, London, of course, tops the chart. And this was way back in 2017 that this chart was created. So I haven't, unfortunately, got any later data that I can share with you. So this chart, it really shows to you how London has, you know, in London, people are still spending a lot of their earnings and their money on buying a property. It's a very big portion of their income is being spent on property. Now, I'm going to pause it there for a moment. You can go off and get a cup of tea if you like, or have a comfort break. It's now 2 minutes to 8, and I know that certainly in our street, some of the people are going to be banging pots and pans and wondering where I am if I don't go and show my show my face. So let's have a pause for till about 1 minute, 2 minutes past 8. We'll come back and I'm going to explain why I think this is really important and the impacts it could have on you as an HMO investor. So don't go anywhere, well, apart from outside to clap and to put the kettle on, and I'll see you back here in a few minutes. So what do I think is a result of this? Why does this actually matter? Well, first of all, let's recognize that people need homes. There is not enough supply in the private rental sector. There's a lot of demand for rental property. We've seen rental values, rents, it steadily increase over the last few years. Certainly in certain parts of the UK, of course, we've seen them go up by a large amount. Places like London, Manchester actually, and Birmingham, some of the cities have had a lot of growth of rental supply. In other areas, for example, where I invest, which is Crewe and Stoke-on-Trent, we haven't seen such high rises. Although I think we were starting to see some of that happen actually just before coronavirus hit. And I believe that's very much because of supply and demand. There simply is not enough supply for the demand that's out there. Now, I think initially what we're going to see, though, is a loss of confidence in the housing system and when we come out of coronavirus. And when I say when we come out of it, what I mean is, first of all, we'll come out of lockdown. Then we will have a number of months before we actually come out of social distancing. In fact, that might happen, that might stay for at least another year until we have a vaccine and better treatment. So this could go on for potentially another 18 months. And I think sometimes the government doesn't want to necessarily share that with us because that can be, can cause panic in the community. So I think initially we're going to see house prices coming down because of a loss of confidence in the system. I think lending is going to reduce as well, because I think that lenders are cautious about lending to people who they're not certain of. So if you've got a good credit rating, that's great. If you already are an active landlord and you've got a good balance sheet, you're not over leveraged, again, I think that's going to go in your favor. So I do think lending will have to continue because the banks need lending to continue. But I think there is going to be greater unemployment. And I'll share that with you in a moment, what the trends are on unemployment. I think we're going to see more bad debt. If we've already got bad debt, particularly in that lower tier of the economy, I think that is going to increase. And often what happens as a result is repossessions, particularly in that lower housing sector. So 2-bed terraces, 2-bed flats, smaller 3-bed terraces. Typically, those are the kind of properties that really suffer. People have bought those, they've tried to get on the housing ladder, they don't earn huge amounts of money, they've struggled maybe with consumer debt, and they'll find that they will get repossessed. Now, as we all know, at the moment, repossessions have been put on hold. In fact, any court process has been put on hold. So at the moment, people can't get repossessed. So they've got a bit of a stay of execution. But I think it's likely as we come out of coronavirus that we'll start to see more fire sale properties, better deals coming forward on properties. I think there's going to be some great deals coming forward. In fact, I was speaking to my business partner earlier today, and he said he's got some tremendous deals coming across his desk, properties that are 40 or 50% below pre-COVID-19 market value. Now, this may be just a correction in the market, but I think it's very likely that we're going to see people become desperate to sell, and they will have to just take creative offers and do creative deals potentially as well. Now, last time I spoke a bit about government debt as well, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just wanted to remind ourselves of the fact that government debt was in 2017 was 1.7 billion, equivalent to 86.5% of GDP. So GDP is our sort of national turnover, if you like. And actually, prior to COVID-19, we were at about 82% of GDP. Now, this, if you imagine, if like an investor, you have you are borrowing, and you're borrowing 82, 85, 90% of turnover, that starts to become a bit of an unsustainable way of you can't service that level of debt. It becomes unsustainable because the cost of it is so high. And of course, because the cost of it starts to become so high, what did the government do, or rather, what did the Bank of England do just a few weeks ago to try and reduce the pressure on the government to service its debt? Because they could see the debt load was going to become enormous. So what was that one thing? Can you remember what that one thing was that the Bank of England did to try and reduce the pressure on the government to service that debt? Yes. Bingo. Ben and Hugh, you've got it. They reduced interest rates, didn't they? They dropped interest rates to 0.1%. I think the lowest it's ever been. And this was, yes, partly because the whole of the UK was under tremendous stress. But actually, yes, Ben, that's a very good point. We'll come to that. But actually, I think that this was also to help the government, because the government had a huge amount of debt, and it knew it was going to have to borrow more. And it meant that in order to do that, it had to be able to make it affordable for it to borrow more money. So that's what they did. So national debt before COVID-19, so at the end of March 2019, we owed £1.8 trillion. That was our national debt. about 84% of GDP. So it was affordable. It was about 5% of overall government spending was spent on debt. So it was okay. Post COVID-19, the government has already said they will do what it takes. Now, I wonder whether Rishi Sunak really understood what he was saying when he said that. I wonder whether he really grasped what he was promising, because that is a huge promise to make, to do what it takes. And I just wonder whether he's really going to be able to live up to that promise. Path is saying he did not. So in other words, he hasn't done what it took. And we'll see over time, won't we, whether that in fact becomes a reality or not. So £330 billion extra has already been pledged. The government have also got this overdraft facility with the Bank of England, which they're now drawing on. Economic activity has been paused in many sectors, or in fact halted altogether. And indications are that GDP, so our national turnover, could reduce by up to or more than 20%. So we've got people who are going to be unemployed, their salaries are going to be lower. So income, tax income from the government is going to go down, and spending is going to go up. And therefore, our debt, which was already a high percentage of our turnover, of our GDP, at 85%, is going to probably go to about 110% of GDP. So just imagine if you had let's say you earn £30,000 in your job, and you now have a debt of, say, £38,000. You might think, well, that's okay, that's reasonable. Yeah, it's actually not too bad, is it? Now let's turn it on its head as to being a property. So you've got a property worth £30,000 and you've got a mortgage of £38,000. How does that sound? Suddenly we begin to see that actually this is really quite an important percentage figure, because the government cannot easily increase GDP. This is GDP is everybody's spending. It's what companies make. It's the whole turnover of the whole country, and it would take an enormous effort. In fact, even over the last 10 years, lots and lots of schemes and money has been produced to try and get the GDP of the UK getting bigger, getting better. But it's just staggered along at 1 or 2% over the last 2 years. It hasn't really done very much at all. But suddenly we're now spending huge amounts of money, and we're going to be in even more debt, and our GDP is going down. So this puts a huge millstone around our neck as a country. Now, this is important. Why? Because we have to get out of this debt. At some point, there's going to be a reckoning about national government debt. And there are a few opportunities here. And as property investors, we are going to benefit from the fact that the government is severely indebted. But there's probably going to be some tough times ahead first. Okay, so let me just do a quick check-in. Make sure you're still all with me. Make sure you're not still banging your pots and pans outside your front door. Quick yes, so that I know you're there and you're okay and I haven't lost you. Great. Good stuff. Fantastic. Good. Thank you. I really appreciate your, your feedback, because, doing a webinar, I can't see you. In fact, you can't see me at the moment because I've turned the video off. So, I have to trust that you're listening. I hope you are listening. I hope it's worthwhile. And well, let's wait till we get to the end, then you can tell me if it's been worthwhile. But I always try and look for the positives out of a difficult situation. Inflation. So when we talk about inflation, inflation is made up of 4 different factors. You have supply and demand. So here on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see there's a lorry there. It might be an Amazon lorry, even though it doesn't have the Amazon logo, but it picks and packs things and delivers them to its customers. So you have supply. You've got a supply chain there. And you have demand. So, for example, well, I'm going to give you some examples actually in a moment, but we've seen recently some very interesting factors on supply and demand of products. But also inflation is affected by the amount of money that's in the economy. So the amount of money that has been printed by the government and which is circulating in the economy. But the fourth area, which is down on the right-hand side of the screen, is the speed, the velocity is what it's called, the velocity at which it circulates in the economy. And each of these four elements affects inflation. It affects the value of that pound. So, for example, let's take well, in fact, let's go to a very recent example. I'll come back to that one in a minute. Toilet rolls. So, a few weeks ago, when COVID-19 was announced, didn't we see a huge demand in toilet rolls? Demand went sky high. People were buying toilet rolls like it's going out of fashion. You know, it was amazing. What were they doing with all these toilet rolls? I don't know. Anyway, let's not speculate on that one. But the point is that, you know, if you were a toilet roll supplier, Parth has just pointed that out. If he was a toilet roll supplier, because he knows that with all that lack of supply, but huge demand, what happens to prices? What happens to prices when you've got massive demand, but not enough supply? Exactly. Prices go up. So it would have been great to be a toilet roll supplier, wouldn't it? Because you could have made loads of money. So that's we are all familiar with that. We know we understand supply and demand. But what is also interesting is if we look at the other side of the graph, is that as the money starts to roll into the from the customer to the toilet roll supplier, the velocity of money also goes up. So we see that the money that's being exchanged for those toilet rolls starts to circulate much, much faster. So that also increases the cost of the toilet roll because things are going much, much faster. So what we see is that there's the two sides of the equation are working together to increase the cost of the toilet roll. So the outworking of this inflationary pressure is the cost of things goes up because there's more money, but it's chasing fewer things. So the cost of things goes up. Now, something happened, was it yesterday or the day before, about 2 days ago, on another commodity, a key commodity, in the opposite direction. What does anybody know what happened? Yeah. You're all avid watchers of BBC, aren't you? I can tell. Exactly, oil. So in this case, oil went down in price. It plummeted. So demand for oil, with there's still a lot of supply, you know, because the world has been producing and drilling for oil. It hasn't really stopped drilling for oil because there's these sort of country kind of oil wars going on. So barrels of oil have been being produced for months and months and months, even actually as supply was dropping before COVID-19. But now that nobody's driving their cars, or not very much, and now that there's no airlines flying, and now that all the people on the cruise ships are stranded outside Barbados, how hard life must be for them. No, not really. I'm being a bit sarcastic, but you know what I mean. Transport and transportation and the need for oil has massively reduced. So there's huge amounts of supply, but there's no demand. So the price of oil has absolutely dropped. In fact, the other day, I think I saw in the ITV news that they were paying you to store the barrels of oil. If certain oil companies would give you money to store it because they just didn't want to store it. So exactly, Parvinder, that's what I would hope to see. I haven't actually been near a petrol station for weeks now, so I don't know if petrol prices have come down. But that would be a lovely thing to happen if petrol prices came down. And that's, of course, what we're hoping to see, because the velocity of money around oil is going to drop. There isn't going to be much money, and it's going to slow right down because nobody wants it. Okay, so inflation is going to drop. The price of oil is going to drop. Okay. Now, this, by the way, sorry, it's a little bit heavy here, but I'll just very quickly talk to you. So this is the Office of Budget Responsibility, and they talk about inflation. And what they are saying is that they think that inflation is going to be modest. The coronavirus shock reduces both demand and supply. but varying degrees in different markets. And I think that's true, just as we've seen from the toilet roll and the oil comparisons. Toilet rolls will still be needed. It's a basic essential. Unless you live in the woods and you're a sort of nomadic herdsman. But most of us use toilet roll. On the other hand, our use of oil has significantly reduced. So it will depend on the commodity we're talking about. The second bullet point is very interesting. While this is a global shock, sterling has also fallen significantly. So what does this mean for us? So this means that the price of the pound, the value of the pound has dropped because of coronavirus. So that means anything we buy from abroad, so let's say if you buy something from China, your pound will not get as far as it would before coronavirus. It's not going to buy as much. So it's going to cost us more money to bring things in from abroad. So it says the pass through to consumer prices is likely to be limited. Well, let's just see about that one, because I suspect that we're going to see quite a lot of inflation on consumer prices over the next year. I think that's minimizing the potential impact. And it's true to say that oil prices, of course, will have a big impact on that as well. So what does this mean? Again, let's ask the question, so what? So what, Wendy? What does this all mean? Well, if we draw these different threads together and we understand what the impact is going to be, I think it's very likely that initially we won't see much inflation because we have got a downward pressure on the economy. But I think, as who said it earlier on, Ben, you mentioned this, initially, while we won't see much inflation, but in order to reduce the value of the debt, so we've got this massive debt overhang, and the only way to decrease the amount that we as a country are paying back, there's only one way, and it's to inflate our way out of the debt. Now, there are many different mechanisms by which this can happen, and I'm not going to go into those all tonight. On my next webinar, we're going to talk about money supply and we'll talk about banking, and we may cover it then. But what I want to say is inflation is not a good thing if you're a consumer because costs go up. Inflation is not a good thing if you're a saver, because generally what happens is the money in the bank is reducing in value. Now, it's okay if interest rates are, say, 6 or 7%, because you're getting some interest that picks up, it balances the inflation. But if you are a saver at this time and you've got £50,000 sitting in the bank account, your £50,000 is being inflated away, it's being reduced in value month on month, year on year, and you're getting the priceless sum of 0.1% interest. How would you feel if you were that saver? How would you feel if you had £50,000 sitting in the bank account, you're getting 0.1% interest, and you knew that money, that cash that you've got sitting in the bank account is actually reducing by maybe 5-7% per year? It might have some serious implications, mightn't it? So for us as HMO investors, one of the key teachings, one of the key messages that I like to get across to my clients, my mentees, my mentoring students, is the importance of learning how to raise money from other people. And at this time, I actually think we have a moral imperative to help other people to make money, because this could be what saves them. I've got a number of elderly relatives, and I know many of them have got a few £1,000s in the bank and they're not making any money. Now, it's not always possible. I acknowledge that. It's not always easy to work with family, and it might not always be right. But I suspect that all of us know somebody who has got some money, and if we can create a win-win where we can borrow that money, give them a return, and in turn we can find a great deal and turn it into great housing, we're making money for ourselves, we're helping our investor make money, and we are providing great quality housing for our tenants. There is nothing morally or financially wrong about doing that. And I think it's something we should seriously think about doing, because there's going to be people who will be desperate, and you could be the answer. What you know and what you do could be the solution to their worries and their problems. So I really believe that this is a great opportunity for us, but you have to know how to do it. So that's what's really important. You learn about this. You need to understand how to raise money from other people properly. So second point on the slide there, the value of the pound will start to be reduced alongside other economies as well, because it's likely that other economies will also go through this reductionism. They'll have to reduce the value of their currency. And that's going to be interesting if that happened, because you tend to reduce the value of a currency against something else. In the past, we've done it against gold, for example, but now we don't have a gold standard, so it may be we have to do it against other currencies, but they may be doing the same thing. So this is why I say I'm not sure what the outlook is for the inflationary kind of what do you call it, the sort of future. However, what my gut tells me is that the debt, unless it's written off, and that would cause terrible repercussions across the world, terrible global repercussions. We can't just write off our debt. We have to deal with our debt because we created the debt, so we've got to deal with it some way. How can we? I believe the only way is to inflate our way out of it. Now, if it has an impact in any form, the one way that we as property investors may benefit from it is inflated property prices, because generally when goods start to go up in value, prices start to go up, and that's what leads then to incomes starting to go up. The government has to start to increase incomes for people, and that leads to increased property prices. However, this is not all good news, because we have something else on the horizon. Oh, dearie, dearie, dearie me. When is the bad news going to end? Well, right now, of course, we've got unemployment as well. We've got unemployment on the horizon. And this is a piece from The Guardian, which said that the UK furlough scheme could just delay massive unemployment rise. Now, I'm just going to answer this question. Great question, TP. What would happen if they write off the debt? So can we come back to that at the end, because that's a really good question. I'd like to come back to that. And also, Parvinder, you've asked a question about how do other people give you money, secure their money. Yep, really, really important to think about security. I love it. That's a really good question. Thank you. So Larry Elliott, I think he's from The Guardian, has said that he thinks that this is just a delay tactic, because in America they haven't done this. In America, they've literally just let people go to the wall effectively. They haven't provided a job retention scheme. They haven't given an 80% of people's salary. They haven't done a furlough scheme. Now, of course, in the UK, we've got this, and there's been a massive demand for this cash. It's shoring up the cash buffers of many a business at the moment. But is it just delaying the inevitable? Is it just delaying inevitable unemployment? So this was from a piece from City AM. So this is a London newspaper. And they quoted Yale Selfin, who's the chief economist for KPMG. We estimate that as many as 13 million jobs are in sectors highly affected by the lockdown, representing 36% of all jobs in the UK. This could see unemployment rising to just under 9% during the lockdown period. I've heard other people say 10. Capital Economics agreed with this view, estimating the current 4% UK unemployment rate could hit 9%. And it predicted that household income could slump 10%. So we have this storm, don't we? We've got unemployment going up, household income coming down, and personal debt levels, which nobody's really talking about, probably also steadily going up too. Capital Economics chief UK economist Paul Dales warned March's small crack may soon turn into a chasm. So this is serious. And when I read things like that, I realize that what I've been thinking, the pieces of the puzzle that I see and I've been reading, I've been researching, I realize that this is more serious, much more serious from the economy than we are possibly recognizing at this point in time. When I hear people say we're not going to have a depression, it's going to be a recession and it's going to have a V shape, where is the upward V coming from? Because if we look at the jobs, I'll just flick through actually at the moment, the sectors that have been hit the hardest or will be hit the hardest, or have been hit the hardest by this pandemic. In fact, I haven't added on here leisure and the fitness industry, because that's another one that I should have added on. But all of those sectors have been hit so badly. Most of those people are on furlough, if not they've been made redundant. Right, Mark, recruitment, I was thinking about you the other day, and I did think, oh dear, I bet this has been hit hard as well. So these sectors are really badly hit in the coronavirus, and they are lower skilled workers. Many of them are already furloughed or have been made redundant. There is a pickup, of course, in jobs in distribution, delivery, and warehousing, but is it enough to make up for the losses that we see? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Before coronavirus, the Home Office, because of Brexit, said we don't want low skilled workers. So basically, low skilled workers would not be able to apply for a work visa. Now, the government may change that because they probably didn't estimate quite how bad it would be. This is another one from, which paper was this from? I think this was from The Independent. The UK could see another 2 million unemployed and a 35% fall in GDP. So here we have, if you see right at the end here, in fact, I've just made it a little bit bigger here. You can see here the yellow line was what was budgeted. That was a sort of continuation of the black line. The blue line is what we are looking at in terms of possible change from where we are now to to unemployment, and then the blue line goes on much higher because of the additional spending the government's been putting out. I think that's very unlikely. I think it's but you see, if you go back to 1918, which was Spanish flu time, and of course it just been after the First World War as well, massive drop then in employment. So very, very serious figures now, and I think people are going to get a handle on this. So what does this mean for us, though, in HMOs? The so what question. Okay, number one, home working stations. We're finding that 60% of our tenants are working from home at the moment. There's 20% of them who are still going out to work. Some of them work in the healthcare sector. We have quite a lot of healthcare workers. Some of them work in caring industry. Some of them are key workers. So they're actually going out of our HMOs and working, in the community, so to speak. Then we have about another 10% of tenants who have been made redundant, and they are struggling, and we're having to help them with navigating the benefit system to get some income, because we haven't been able to ask them to leave the HMO, to put it bluntly, not yet anyway. And then we've got about another 10% of them who are on furlough. So they are either working from home. Well, when I say they're working from home, they're at home. They're not really working from home because they're not allowed to, but they may be doing other things. Hopefully putting the bins out. That's what I've been hoping. They might actually even clean up the kitchen for once. That would be good result, wouldn't it? So what does this mean for HMO? So I think we've got to think about some of this. How do we provide for our tenants? How do we as HMO landlords think about ways that we can overcome the difficulties that some of our tenants will be facing? Cleanliness and clean standards are going to be paramount. So educating tenants about how to clean, how to use cleaning materials. We've got 2 teams of cleaners. One team have carried on working with PPE. They've got their own PPE. They warn the tenants when they're going to go in and do the cleaning. So the tenants stay in their rooms, and they've stayed separate from the cleaners. So the cleaners will go in and do a thorough clean, a deep clean, and then leave the house, and everything's been absolutely fine. But another cleaning company has decided they're shutting down. For them, it's cheaper to stay closed than it is to work. So they have stopped cleaning. Now, that's quite a challenge for us because we offer cleaning as part of the contract. In our contract with our tenants, we say to them, we offer cleaning. But actually, the tenants have been great. They've completely understood why we can't do this and why the cleaning company have said they can't do cleaning anymore. So so far it hasn't been too much of a problem, and in fact we're looking now at how we can perhaps provide some extra cleaning materials and cleaning products to help tenants who are in those HMOs where there's no cleaner going in on a regular basis. Now, having policies about move-ins, social distancing and keeping safe is critical. You might use an agent. So just find out what the agent is doing. Is the agent actively managing that? Some agents have said, we're not going to do any more move-ins. Well, the government hasn't actually said you can't do a move-in. What the government has said in their documentation is your move really essential? So the government has made it really clear that people can still move, but only if it's essential. So it is possible for people to move in to the HMO. However, what we've started to do is virtual viewings. So we're not doing any in-person viewings anymore, because that is where the risk comes in. And we've given our staff PPE as well to use when they go and do the videos of the rooms and the properties, which of course they can then reuse anyway if they need to. So keeping safe, social distancing, make sure that you have got policies around these things and that you check the actual government guidance. I think there's been a lot of fear, there's been a lot of myths, there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what you can and can't do. And actually the truth is you can still move people into HMOs, but you need to risk manage it. It can happen, but you need to manage the risks. So I think there's going to be a reduction in move outs because the government have said, is your move really necessary? So that's good. That's a good thing, isn't it? Because that will help our occupancy figures stay high because people can't move out. However, you might want them to move out. They might have stopped paying their rent, for example, which some tenants have chosen to interpret the guidance to say they don't need to pay rent. Again, we have been pretty clear with them. We've sent a letter to each tenant and we put signs on the notice board to say, no, it's not true that you shouldn't be paying your rent. You should still pay your rent. However, if you're having difficulties, please contact us. So we've asked our tenants to let us know if they're having a problem so we can then negotiate with them and come to a suitable solution. Now, on that note, if you are interested in seeing how we do it and what tools we're using, on our group Facebook page, I have set up a link. It's an announcement at the top of the Facebook page, and you can see a package, a coronavirus help package that we've put together. And in that package, there is a PDF copy of the form that we're using for people who might go into rent arrears and they want to request a rent arrears holiday. So you feel free to adopt that and change it as you wish. We've also got some signage and posters and potential email that you could send to your tenants and other information that you might find helpful and useful. So another thing that you could do is learn about benefit rates and levels. Our team have started to really get engrossed in this. Actually, they're becoming experts at benefits. Now, that wasn't what they thought they would be doing. None of us did, but I think we have to be savvy. And if that means that you have to understand how universal credit works, what the benefit rates are in your area, I think this could enable you to stay ahead of the curve and support those tenants who are currently struggling, but also ensure you have cash flow coming in. Now, just a quick question to everybody in the group. How many of you are already working with tenants who are struggling with cash flow and are applying for benefits? Just put yes in the chat panel if that's you. Thanks, Ben. Thank you, Claire. Okay, so Parvinder is but not applying for benefit. Okay, only one, Sarah, that's good. So I think there's going to be a mixture here, isn't there? That's Mac, you have. So if we might not like doing this, and it's not something. When I started in HMOs, I was looking to invest in the young professional market. I never thought that I would be investing in or I'd be working with benefit claimants. But we have to adapt and change, don't we? And I think that for the next few months, if we are ahead of this curve and we understand how to navigate that benefit system, it helps our tenants, but it also helps us. Yes, Sarah, I think you're right. I think the number will rise. Now, another thing that you can do is develop some local partnerships. I have to say, I have heard some fantastic stories over the last week of people working with their local council, working with local housing providers, working with local charitable bodies who are tasked by the government to help with people who need accommodation. And this isn't just rough sleepers or homeless people. These are people who are, they maybe need a little bit of support. And I'm finding that there's there's a huge demand, actually. There's a huge demand because the government have put a lot of pressure on councils to house people. So ask around, contact your local housing officer. If you can't get through to them because they're too busy, contact somebody in social services, because they should be able to point you in the right direction of somebody who could help. There'll be somebody in your local council who will be coordinating, or should be coordinating, a response, and would actually value having a phone call with a local person, a local landlord. So get onto the phone people, start to take some action around this, because you never know what might be created as a result. And I think the final thing is also just to think about having an openness to other types of tenants. So we've seen a bit of a growth in older people. We've got a couple of retired individuals living in our HMOs. Well, I never thought I would see that for once. We've seen people who are separated, and I think there's going to be rising levels of divorce. It sounds dreadful what's happening, and I'm so appalled by what I hear about domestic violence. And we might be hearing people who are on partial benefits as well. So all these kind of people need to have a home, don't they? They need to have a safe, well-run home. And you could be that person to give that to them. Okay, very, very quickly, I just go through house prices. What do I think is going to happen to house prices? Well, this is a bit of research that was done on HMOs, that the average income for a tenant was about 24,000. Average rent was about 556. So they spend about 34% of income on rental. And affordability is the main reason for living in an HMO. So this gives us an awful lot of good assets, good potential, that we can rent our rooms out to people who probably didn't think they were going to be living in an HMO, but may end up having to live in an HMO because it will be the most affordable type of housing that they can have. And that's the piece that showed that councils need to house all rough sleepers as well. So the question is, do we think demand for low-cost housing will go up or down as a result of COVID-19? I expect it will go up. Will demand for all-inclusive rents go up or down? Probably go up. And who is going to need HMO rooms? Loads of people are going to need HMO rooms. They might not have been the people that you were initially envisaging that you were going to be renting to, but nevertheless, when needs must, we rent to them. Lots of information here about rental demand and rents rising. And I think that once we're again out the other side and we start to see some inflationary pressure come through, we can more or less count on the fact that rents will probably also start to go up as well. So I think the long-term outlook is really, really positive for HMOs. So let's just conclude. People need homes. It's a basic requirement of life. There isn't enough PRS supply. We're likely to see a house price reduction initially because of loss of confidence, but I think that will change over time. And this is a great time, of course, to get some fantastic deals. Let's remember that. So it means you can offer slightly lower rents because you've paid slightly less for your property. We'll see house repossessions go up. And again, this could help us as investors to get some great deals. Savers are not making any money. So if you can work with somebody who's got savings, this could be a great partnership. In a couple of years' time, people will start spending again and employment will increase again. So I think it's going to be a slow recovery. I don't think it's going to be the V shape that people are hoping it's going to be, but I think we will get there if we hang in there. And because of inflation, asset prices will rise, but it means we have to be flexible and deft to manage this changing wave of different types of HMO tenants. Focus on cash flow to stay liquid and serve your tenants, because by doing that, you will generate very good will with them. You may get some great referrals from them and they may stay longer and help you out more. And at a time like this, we all actually need each other, don't we? So just a very quick plug. Next week, I'm doing a webinar on how you can make money from HMOs even during coronavirus. We'll be looking at how to do the practical side of it. So how to do viewings and sourcing, how to manage builders and refurbs. We've got a refurb going on a 5-bed HMO in Stoke right now. It's going to be done in 6 weeks. Initially, this is just going to take 9 weeks. How have we managed to do that? I'm going to share with you that case study next week, exactly how the builders have been able to do it. And how do you manage your tenants and cash flows? All the tools we've been using to make sure we maximize cash flow at this time. So that is going to be next Wednesday. That is the link there, and I'll put the link in the chat panel as well. So no, I can't put it in the chat panel. I'll have to add it later. But please do register for that. We'll be sending out emails and putting it on social media as well. So if you're interested in looking in more depth about how we do those three things, sourcing and viewings, builders and refurbs, tenants and cash flow, practical, tangible case studies and advice, things that myself and Ian are doing currently to make money from HMOs, please come along to next webinar. That is it for me though, for my, I didn't quite finish on time, did I? For my section. So now it's over to you. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for participating in this time so far. Those are my contact details. If you want to get in touch, if you have any other thoughts or ideas or queries that you have. But let me go now to your questions, because I'm sure many of you have got questions that you want to ask about what I've been sharing tonight. So just take a quick sip of water. So just take a few moments and have a think about what your questions are around some of the things that I've shared this evening. So one question from Parvinder was, how do other people giving you money secure their money they have invested? There's lots of ways to do that, Parvinder. You can secure, if it's a personal loan, you could give them a personal guarantee. I've known people to give a personal guarantee on their own assets, their house, their car, a piece of jewelry. It partly depends on how much the loan is, and it depends on how you structure the deal with the investor. And that also depends on whether the investor is a high net worth or a sophisticated or a retail investor. Now, you need to understand all of that really to make it work. But just to say that you're absolutely right to ask the question. One of the questions I always ask for my investor is, what security would you like? What would work for you? And that's a way of opening up that discussion. Okay, so another good question here from TP. What would happen if the debt was written off? So because we work in a global economy and the pound is relative to other currencies, and at the moment the dollar is what we call the reserve currency. So that's the currency that all other currencies are measured against. If we created, because we can create debt, I mean, I can't create my own debt. I wish I could, but I can't. But the government can create debt. What they do is they issue bonds or gilts, and they sell them to the Bank of England, and the Bank of England gives them the money, and then they can go and spend that money. So let's say they've done that, and we know they've done it to the tune of £330 billion just a few weeks ago. If in a couple of years' time they went, oh, do you know what, this debt is a right old burden, isn't it? What do you think? Wouldn't it be great if we just wrote it off? We'll just write it off the balance sheet of the Bank of England, and we'll just write it off the balance sheet of the government. How do you think other economies around the world would view that? Because we've then gone from an economy that had 110% debt to GDP, and suddenly we're going, we've got no debt. Yes, happy days. Our GDP could absolutely fly because we haven't got debt holding us back. We could create more debt and invest in the economy. But what this would happen is it would hugely reduce trust in us as an economy and as us as a country. And consequently, there's one thing that often happens when that happens, and it's called war. And this is what happened in the Second World War. It's one of the factors that caused the Second World War was that in Weimar Republic, Germany, they printed and printed and printed money, and it became out of control. And they devalued the Deutschmark, and that was part of the reason why the Second World War happened. So these are all very, very difficult factors for a government to balance and to measure, but very, very important if we're going to have world peace. Thank you very much, Mark. Glad you enjoyed the webinar. That's great. What percentage house price decrease, in your opinion, peak to trough? Oh, you're really asking, you're asking me to pin pin myself to my collars now. I think we could see I think we could see some great deals. I think we could see up to 50% decrease in prices in certain areas, in certain properties. I suspect that London will see a very big correction because London relies on a service economy. There's not much manufacturing there, and a lot of the banking industry, while at the moment it's not being affected too much, I think it will be affected. So I suspect that London prices will go down quite significantly. I think for the rest of the country, we might see a drop of maybe 15 to 20%, but I think that will actually come up in the next couple of years because, again, when we think about supply and demand, we know that we still need a lot of houses. There's still not enough houses in the UK for the population. And because the construction industry has been very badly hit by coronavirus, building has stopped in most places. So then they're not building the houses that they need. Therefore, I suspect in areas where there's a reasonable economy and there are quite a lot of low-level jobs, I think those areas will do quite well, actually. I hope it did explain it, TP. Do feel free to come back to me if you have other questions about that. Any other questions from anybody? I'll look at the Q&A actually, because I did ask you to put it there. So Ben, are we taking on new investors? No, we're not at the moment. We have decided to pause that for the time being because we want to see what happens after coronavirus. I think we feel that we want to wait until things have kind of gone through the pipeline, partly because we don't necessarily want to pay more than we should for a property. And so, yeah, we've decided we're pausing taking on new investors at the moment. Thank you for the question. Okay, what's the best way to get in touch with social services or a care provider company? If you search Cash on, let's say your area is Stoke, for example, Stoke Social Services or Stoke Housing Provider, a lot of them will come up. The government has funded, they tend to fund through the local authority out, so it's like a pipeline of money that comes through the local authority and goes out to housing providers or housing care providers. So there's probably somebody in the team at your local housing team in the local authority who will know who those commission providers are, and those are the ones that you want to make contact with. Thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate your feedback. So really good point about lenders. So one of the things that I was pleased to see this week is that the FCA have given guidance to the banking industry to say that no one's credit file should be affected if they take a credit, if they take a mortgage holiday. So that is worth checking on. Sorry, not checking on, I mean that's worth referring to. If I can get the reference, I'll bring it up. Just one second. I'll get you this link because I think it's quite important to just have a quick look at this. Yeah, I'll just quickly share this with you. And this does link with your question, by the way. Okay, so basically, as you can see, this is the FCA website. You'll still be charged interest during your payment holiday. Your credit file. Our guidance makes clear to firms that they should ensure that taking a payment holiday will not have a negative impact on your credit file. So that is there. So if your lender does say that there's going to be an impact on your credit file, I think you should quote that. That's on the FCA website guidance. So, you know, it's very clear that's the situation. So with that in mind, what lenders are going to want is to have the debt serviced. I think you can see from tonight's webinar that servicing debt is going to be a massive concern for the government, and it should be for us as well. We should be thinking about how are they going to service their debt. And of course, as investors, we worry about servicing our debt as well, which is why we want the rental income. In terms of, I have changed from student to young professional, and that was absolutely fine. We haven't changed from young professional to somebody on benefits in the whole house. So we've got some houses, some HMOs, where we've got maybe 2 tenants who are on housing benefit and the other 4 or 5 are still working or they're furloughed. So the majority are still young professionals. Now, those two who are on housing benefit are actually temporarily on housing benefit. And my argument to the lender would be, listen, these guys came to our property, they were employed, they are now unemployed, and so they're accessing benefits, but they will, at the earliest opportunity, look for jobs that will take them back into the employment market, so they will still be employed. But I think that is a very good question, because it will be one of the conditions of your mortgage that you're renting to a certain type of the population, certain sector of the population. The other impact, of course, is council tax. And if you are renting to a house of people who are all unemployed, then you don't have to pay council tax. It's a small saving, but let's make the most of it. Let's make the most of everything we can get. I agree, it's much better if we can get through this, not to take a mortgage holiday. We haven't had to take any mortgage holidays. We haven't had to furlough our staff. We've got enough reserves to get us through. Although if it carries on for 8 months, I'll tell you again in 8 months where we are, but certainly I think we should be okay, which is great. And I suppose this is where I still feel very passionate about HMOs, because I think that in the good times or in the bad, they can serve people, they can serve investors, they can serve landlords, they can serve tenants. HMOs are a great part of the housing sector. And if you read my book, you'll know, I know some of you have ordered this book and it will be coming to you very shortly. We're packing them tomorrow. You'll read about my passion, because I really believe that HMOs are a grand way of making money and helping others too. Okay, great. We've got the last about 5 minutes left. So Ben mentioned, I heard of one mortgage lender that is now asking on the application whether you've applied or intend to apply for a mortgage holiday. Yes, I've heard of that too, Ben. So that's, again, one to try and avoid doing if you're looking for new finance. HMRC tax, great point, Parvinder. As tenants will not be paying and cash flow becomes a problem, the concessions are that you will have a delay on paying your tax. So any corporation tax, or if you had payment on account from your own personal income tax, that is now being deferred. So there are some deferments there, and you can contact HMRC and let them know that you'll be deferring. I know for VAT, for example, they're not asking for you to pay VAT. You don't have to do anything about that. So that's good. There are a few concessions here and there, not a lot. And unfortunately, some of the things that they have announced, the government support, doesn't relate to us as property investors. In fact, if you want to know more about that, there's a video on YouTube that I've done about what help is available to you if you are a property investor. And I'm afraid it's not good news, but it's still worth you looking at the video so you understand what the government is offering to the wider population. Under what circumstances might a lender call a loan in? So again, at the moment, Mark, the message coming through from government is they are not allowed to do this. It's become illegal for 3 months, just as it's become illegal for landlords to issue possession notices. Actually, not what the law says is that landlords have to give 3 months notice of possession. It's not that they can't issue them, but they have to give 3 months notice. So as of the 27th of April, you can then start a Section 8 or a Section 21 ready for the end of the 3-month period, if you need to do that. So a loan can't be called in at the moment. Once coronavirus is over, let's just see what the situation is with the banking sector. I think they are probably very nervous. Every bank will have their own particular stress test. The Bank of England has a stress test. The Council of Mortgage Lenders offers stress tests in terms of asking for 125%, or in some areas 145% of income to loan interest repayment. But every lender will also have their own internal policy about repossessions or calling a loan in, which is slightly different. So if you're, I presume you're referring to if values drop, what would happen then? Would a lender call a loan in? Well, if they did, there would be uproar because everybody's values will have dropped. So I think that if they did it for a few investors in the marketplace, it would cause massive ructions. So I think that is probably very unlikely to happen. But again, who knows? This is why we have to be educated, isn't it? We've got to try and keep alert, keep watching, keep seeing what's happening so we can make the right decisions and act accordingly. Partha says we are investors. We are not a business. Absolutely. Even though we use business principles. Fantastic. Okay. So actually, Ian, you are on the line as well, aren't you? I haven't even really said hello to you this evening. I'm sorry, Ian. I was just wondering if you wanted to say anything. Right, so Sarah, you've got a student HMO you think might not be filled come July, September, so looking at other possibilities. That is a brilliant question. Actually, it's interesting because I was speaking to my son who's at a Newcastle University in the north. He's actually in Nottingham at the moment with his girlfriend, but he was saying to me that he doesn't think they're going to be going back in the summer term. They're going to do everything remotely, and he thinks that they won't be back till September or October. Now he's still paying his rent actually to his landlord because of his loan. His loan covers that, but it's really important that you start thinking about this now. If you've got students, what's the likelihood of them actually coming back or starting the term in September? It's not particularly an area of specialism for me, but good for you for thinking about it. Hi, Ian. Great to have you. Do you want to say anything as we wrap up this evening? Is there anything else you want to add to my words of wisdom? I'm next week. Ian's going to have a bit of a bigger voice on the webinar. He's going to have more of a say. It won't just be me, because he's going to be sharing some of the amazing things he's doing in his portfolio at the moment. He's had some ups and downs, but he's come through it and done really, really well. So we're going to share some of those tools, those learnings that he's had, and some of the wins that he's had as well, so you can benefit from that. So that's next Wednesday's webinar. We'll send the link out after this. So if you want to join us for then, it would be great to have you. Okay, well, look, it's 9 o'clock, so time for us to say goodnight. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it's been useful. There's been a lot of data, a lot of information to share, but I really want to help you to be an educated investor. I want to help you make your success out of HMOs. And I believe that by education and training, educating ourselves, we can do this. If you want to know any more about what we do in the Ultimate HMO Success System, please get in touch. Love to have a conversation with you about that. But until I speak to you all again, have a very, very good evening. This will be uploaded to YouTube in the next couple of days. So if you want to rewatch it, share it, or remind yourself of what was discussed, you can do that anytime. Speak to you all very soon. Take care for now. Bye.